Welcome back to Kevin Toll Reads. This is my final book reviews of June on the Range. I hope you're doing well. Happy Monday. Yeah, let's get started. I have two books I want to showcase today in this review, and we're going to start with The Gunsmith, Vigilante Justice by J.R. Roberts, published in 1998. This is another tale in The Gunsmith, a.k.a. Clint Adams, a.k.a. Spicy Books. So let's talk about the summary of this thing. So Clint Adams receives a wire or letter to visit with an old friend by the name of Judge Parker in Fort Smith. So he makes his way to Fort Smith and seeks out Parker. And in doing so, he realizes that the town, the Fort Smith's town, is pretty heavily deputized. And that gets him thinking. He meets with Judge Parker to realize that one of Parker's famed deputies, an African-American by the name of Bass Reeves, he is out trying to find and locate and bring back to justice an outlaw by the name of Jim Webb. Parker is worried about Reeves because he seems to be on kind of a crusade and has gone kind of off the rails. Reeves is known as one of Parker's best men, and the fact that he is an African-American deputy under Parker's kind of thumb means that it's a lot at stake for Parker's reputation as a judge and his deputizing process. And so he wants Clint to go out and find Reeves before Reeves does something he's going to regret in regards to chasing Jim Webb. And so that is kind of the premise of the story. Like most of these Gunsmith novels, these are pretty short on the premise, a lot on the fun, heavy on the spice. And so let's talk a little bit about what I enjoyed. Clint ends up taking a younger kind of greenhorn deputy with him by the name of Al Maxim, and I thought it was really interesting. It creates kind of an interesting dynamic. You get to see, at least, I get to see in my second Gunsmith novel a different side of Clint as he has to take this younger guy under his kind of wing, so to speak, and I thought that created an interesting dynamic. Jim Webb, this outlaw, is a very interesting character. Definitely kind of out there, as most outlaws are, but he comes to the town of Colton to try to place a trap for Reeves, who he knows is following him after months and months. And I thought it was really interesting because there's also a gentleman there that used to run with Webb and is trying to get his life together and is now a saloon and hotel owner and wants nothing to do with Webb. And so that also kind of creates an interesting little plot dynamic. But yeah, Reeves, an interesting character, very single-minded, very obsessive, wants nothing but to get at Webb, and wants to because apparently, I believe, in the story at the very beginning, Webb kills one of Reeves's friends, and so that creates a personal connection, and you kind of understand the thought process, the mental side of Bass Reeves as he's chasing Jim Webb. I really enjoyed this particular piece. At the beginning of the story, we meet a young lady by the name of Molly, and Molly is a lady who gets paid for services, and I thought that was really interesting because later in the story, we meet another one of those gals, and her name is Tina. And I thought that was really interesting, being my wife's name. So I was at lunch with my wife and Molly, one of my wife's coworkers, and I was telling them about this, and they got a really nice kick out of it. But yeah, Molly and Tina in the same book, both one at the beginning, one at the end, don't really have much in the terms of adding to the characters or a main or sub protagonist or antagonist. But I thought it was interesting that both of these were ladies of service, so to speak. And I thought that was really interesting. One other thing I really enjoyed was the jumps from point of view. We get point of view from Reeves, point of view from Webb, point of view from Adams. I thought that was really, really cool. Obviously, I really enjoyed the Al Maxim dynamic. He's young. He does some really stupid things, and it's always interesting how Clint corrects him, even though at the beginning he's like, you're going to do what I say, and that's not going to happen. So I thought that was really interesting. There is a couple criticisms I have. It does use the N-word and throughout this novel in several different places. That's going to probably bother some people. It bothers me because this is not necessary in this time of day and age. But again, this is written, almost 30 years ago. There is 3 or 4 parts that are spicy that I end up, when I started reading into them, I skipped. Obviously, Clint's not up, working together on the plot of the story with a woman like he was in the previous entry I read. So there's less of the spice in this entry, so that was nice. But yeah, those are my criticisms. My rating is a 4.1. I think overall it's a really solid entry. These are what they are. I mean, they're adult westerns. They're short on the plot. They're heavy on the spice. It's a returning character that's interesting, and it is what it is. They're palate cleansers. So you can read these really quickly. They're 180, 200 pages at most. You fly through them. It is what it is. They're quick, fun reads. And so that is my review of The Gunsmith 202 Vigilante Justice by J.R. Roberts. Really enjoyed it. 4.1. And so now let's talk about the next book on this agenda. And so the second and my final book for review for June on the Range is Hondo by Louis L'Amour. Obviously, this is an iconic one because it's a famously known novel, but also a famously known movie starring John Wayne. The film was done and adapted in 1953. I had some fun facts to share with you. Hondo was serialized in Collier magazine before actually being published into a full-length novel. Louis L'Amour has often said that Hondo is one of his favorite characters that he created. The 1953 film was one of the earliest movies shot in 3D, although most people saw it in 2D. And Geraldine Page, who plays Angie Lowe in the original movie, received an Oscar nomination, which at the time was a rare feat for a Western and for a female. Kind of a book versus film. The film precedes the actual novel, which is kind of funny. L'Amour wrote the full-length novel after the film. The screenplay came first, which was by James Edward Grant. L'Amour wrote the novelization afterwards, making it rare among books and Westerns. The tone in the film is more patriotic and romantic, while the book adds more introspective looks, especially with Hondo. You can definitely see that after reading it. The violence and depth is definitely different as well. I have not seen the film, but I did some research, and the novel explores more of Hondo's internal struggles in his past, whereas the film downplays some of that past and violence and grit for kind of a broader appeal. But anyways, it is a well-known movie and book, the book published in 1953. So the summary of this is basically Hondo Lane meets Angie Lowe. She's a strong female woman raising a son in a remote ranch around Apache country and Apache territory. The two kind of form a tentative connection. Hondo comes upon her ranch after his horse it basically stumbles, and he has to basically, flee. He's got Apaches around. It's a very tense situation. So he comes to her looking to buy a horse, and she makes Hondo known that her husband has been away, but some things, need care for, and Hondo soon realizes that and realizes there may be more to this than meets the eye. But as he's spending time there and then goes on after a while to the local army fort, he realizes that the tensions amongst the Apaches and U.S. Army have risen. They had a truce at one point, and now things are no longer under truce. So Hondo must navigate his loyalty to the army and the government and his lone love and survival and what he thinks are feelings for Angie Lowe. And so what I found enjoyable about this was Hondo. I mean, obviously as a character, former gunfighter, there's little nods and mentions to that. He's very tough, very well known. He has a lot of common sense and logic, but he's been around enough to he knows different things, like he's shodding the horses, doing blacksmith work, sharpening her axe, doing kind of the husband type chores that apparently her husband hasn't done in I don't know how long. And you slowly start to realize that maybe she's putting him on. She's not telling the whole truth about her husband and their relationship. And so Angie Lowe is a very interesting character, very determined woman, independent, raising her son, She definitely is a little on the naive side when it comes to raising the son, where Hondo is more, well, let the boy jump and he'll realize if he falls, he's going to hurt himself. Like the swimming scene, like, well, basically he throws him in, like, that's the fastest way to learn to swim. Very logical thinking, a harder approach to parenthood versus Angie's, more loving. But she realizes that Hondo's more than just this brash man that may have been in gunfights and killed people. I liked Chief Vittorio. I thought he was interesting. He sees something. I liked Hondo's past, and he spent time with Indians, so he's familiar with them and gets a lot of respect. I thought it was interesting. Obviously, he has a good friend in Buffalo Baker, and then Silva and Ed Lowe. I thought they were interesting sub characters. Ed and Hondo, that situation was really interesting. And then obviously Silva's going to come to there's going to be some kind of dynamic and conflict there that does. Some excerpts I thought were really good was a man's got to do what he believes, even if it's wrong. That's what makes him a man. And I thought it was a really good one. And then overall, kind of this depiction of the setting and time was, it was a land that asked nothing and gave nothing. And I thought that was really good. In terms of rating it overall, though, I'm giving it a 3.9. And hear me out, because people are going to be like, oh my gosh, like, how can you rate an adult Western over Hondo? And I did. Here's why, and it may not be fair, but here's my thinking is, it was good. I liked Hondo, but it wasn't great. It had some interesting conflict at the end and confrontation, but it was very slow at times. It really was. And a lot of it's because of the retrospective looks at Hondo in his past. For me, though, it just didn't flow real well. And I think overall, too, I came in with this expectation that this is such a classic, that I had high expectations, and I just don't think that it met them. And so 3.9, it's not a terrible score, don't get me wrong. And I would highly recommend you read this book. I think it's very good, especially if you like Westerns or want to dip your toe into Western. I think this is a great entry point as well. If you're a reader who loves, lean on the action, narratives with moral center, anyone who kind of appreciates landscapes, storytelling, Louis L'Amour is a no-brainer. If you're looking, again, where I kind of rated it down, if you're looking for more fast pace, this is not slow, but it's not fast pace. If you're looking for more, periodic specific roles and settings, and you want a more limited female perspective, this one may be a pass on that, because you definitely get a lot of Angie Lowe in this as well. But that's my take for The Gunsmith and Hondo. Yes, I know a lot of people are going to be like, what are you talking about? You rated an adult Western over Hondo. And I did. And I think my reasoning speaks why. When you get a book that's so heavily touted, you kind of come into it a little, I'm not going to justify it anymore. But it is what it is. 3.9 is not a bad score. I definitely recommend you read Hondo. The adult Western, maybe if you're looking for something fun and adult situations don't matter to you, but both are definitely a recommend. And that's my last review for June on the Range. I hope you enjoy this, and I will talk to you all in the next one. Thanks.